How do you get out of this awful place? I'm Joseph. This is Input English. Today I have a story for you. It's a true story, and the whole purpose of telling this true story is to present a lot of English language to you. This is comprehensible input, but it needs to be interesting. In order for videos on the Input English channel to be useful for English language learners, I speak just a little bit more slowly than I would ordinarily. I also make certain to pronounce words very clearly. I have no regional accent that would cause confusion, and I don't use slang. This magical combination makes the content much more comprehensible. The level of the input on this channel is best described as intermediate level. The reason I choose that is it allows me to present more interesting material, and I assume that millions of people around the world have studied English in school, so I figure that you have a level in English that will allow you to understand what I'm saying. This story is true. It's about my wife and I when we were traveling a little more than 10 years ago. As I recall, the year was 2014. We had traveled to France and spent most of our time in Paris. When it comes to travel, and really all phases of our lives, we each bring something to the table. My wife and I are arguably opposites. There's a saying in English, opposites attract. Her knowledge and her style turns out to be a very good complement to what I present. When it comes to travel, my knowledge of science and math don't usually have much importance, but I am familiar with geography and history, and that usually is something that we take advantage of when we travel. My wife, on the other hand, is more well-versed in culture and art. On this trip to Paris, we had an extended visit. We had rented an apartment downtown, and that allowed us to make excursions during the day, any time of the day, to see lots of different things. You could say that we visited the usual places, the tourist places. Yes, we did go up in the Eiffel Tower. We walked along the Champs-Élysées. But we also visited a lot of neighborhoods, a lot of places that might be a little more obscure. We went to a lot of museums, specifically art museums. Yes, we did go to the Louvre, but that was not my favorite. The Louvre is impressive, but it was not my favorite. The museums to which we went were museums I knew nothing about. I had never heard of them, but my wife knew them, and she mandated that we were going to see these wonderful museums. We went to the d'Orsay, the Marmottan, and the Museum L'Orangerie. Now, by now, you know my pronunciation in French is not very good. I can't help it. On these trips, our visits were aided by the fact that my wife spoke some French. I, on the other hand, did not. She would do the talking, and I would just smile. Among these museums, which I was visiting for the first time, my favorite was the Marmottan. At one point in our sojourn in Paris, my wife mandated a road trip. We were going to take an excursion. We took a train, a bus, and a walk to get to this location. She took me to a place I had never heard of, but she felt that it was important that we go there. So what is this mysterious location? Well, I will tell you at the end. It was in this location that I heard the words that I started this video with. How do you get out of this terrible place? That was a question posed to us in this location that we traveled to. The person saying those words was an American. He said it with a standard American accent, and he genuinely looked upset. He was not happy. He was very loud and definitely not happy. So now let me show you a picture of the location in which we were standing when we heard him say those words. Here is that scene. It doesn't match, does it? That scene and his words just don't match. Another point I should make here is that 11 years ago, I was not making videos. I was able to make still pictures, but I didn't have any video capability. If this same event unfolded in front of me today, I would have video equipment and I would try to interview this fellow to get a great video clip to understand why he was so upset. But back then, I was just making still pictures. I have been very influenced by my parents who taught me about photography. In years past, I would have traveled with a 35mm film camera and typically 3 lenses. I would have taken a lot of pictures on film, and then when I returned to home, I would get that film developed and prints made. Of course, that is an old-fashioned approach because digital photography has substantially taken over. One of the problems with a big camera rig is it's heavy. My wife and I learned that when we go on a big trip, such as to Europe, we want to travel light. And one of the things that we did was eliminate the heavy, bulky photography equipment. So on this trip that I'm telling you about, I was taking pictures with my cell phone. After the fellow posed his question, he left, and we continued our visit. So what is this mysterious place that we were visiting? Well, let me show you some more pictures, and maybe you can come to understand where we were. I was very taken by the beauty of the location, and so I took a lot of pictures showing the flora and fauna, that is the plants and animals, mostly plants, in this location. There were some beautiful flowers, and so here is a morning glory. I don't know the name of this particular flower, but it was very colorful and very beautiful. There were several places in which we saw spider webs. This first spider web I can describe as an orb. Spiders spin various kinds of webs. If the spider web is very disoriented and chaotic, we call that a cobweb. But if it's organized like this one, we would call that an orb. This spider is an orb weaver. Some spider webs are shaped like cups. The one thing spider webs have in common is that they are part of the spider's strategy to get food. They are used to catch small insects, which it uses as food. Some spider webs are underground. Here's another example of an orb weaver's web. This one is located in the bamboo. The spider chose to make its web between the bamboo plants. This flower that I'm showing you here has a bee sampling the nectar and perhaps collecting pollen. This bee was doing the job that bees do. Pollinating flowers, making honey, and collecting pollen. This next picture is a photograph of a snail. This is a mollusk. It's a snail that is terrestrial. You find snails in moist locations. You don't usually find a snail in the desert, but in a moist location, snails are fairly common. A little further on our exploration, I took this picture. When you first look at it, it may be a little confusing until I explained that I was shooting into flowing water. This was a stream, and the plants that you see there are water plants, which are underwater. Now it makes sense. One of the features of this location that was very striking was the pond. There may have been more than one pond, and I took a lot of pictures of the pond. Some of the pictures I took were not very impressive because of the lighting and perhaps because of my composition. Not all the pictures I took were beautiful. The location was beautiful, and what I observe is usually when I make a photograph, it doesn't necessarily capture the true beauty of the place I'm visiting and photographing. Here's another picture of the pond. Whenever one makes a landscape picture, the question is whether it would be beneficial to put a human form in that picture. That would add scale. It would give another point of interest. It would make the picture perhaps a little more personal. I'm not advocating that photographs should be made based on a formula, but oftentimes I look for an opportunity to add a human form into a landscape photo. Here's an example of a picture of this pond, a very beautiful location, but it has a human form in it, which I think adds to the picture. It makes it more interesting to me. Here is substantially the same picture, but the human form is not visible. It's really a matter of personal preference which way you approach this. When I showed this picture, many of you may have been able to discern the location. Mind you that before I was taken to this location by my wife, I knew nothing about it. But perhaps that last photograph allowed you to identify our location. This is Claude Monet's garden. This is in Giverny in Normandy. We traveled there for quite some time from Paris to get to this location, and it was absolutely magical. Claude Monet was an extraordinary painter, and he lived at his garden in the house there between 1883 and 1926, the time of his death. He lived more than 40 years on this location, and you can see the influence of this location on his paintings. The paintings of the water lilies at the Museum L'Orangerie in Paris show what he was looking at in his garden. For me, this was one of the most beautiful places I had ever visited. It was exquisitely interesting, very rewarding, and I really couldn't understand how that other visitor to this same location could be so exasperated and so negative about his visit. I couldn't imagine what he was talking about. For us, this was a unique opportunity to visit a beautiful location. I invite comments below, and if you like videos like this, be sure to click on this one next. See you soon.